In Magic the Gathering, cards that let you search your library for a basic land and put it into your hand or onto the battlefield are a dime a dozen. They show up in every single set in one way or another, and while those cards can be good for ramping and fixing your mana, there's also a broader version of this effect that is far more powerful. I'm talking about cards that let you search your library for any land. We don't see these effects nearly as often because they're so strong. After all, giving you access to literally any land in your deck is pretty amazing, especially when you have powerful non-basics. To be eligible for this video, a card had to be able to tutor up any land and not be able to grab anything else. This means that something like Traverse the Ulvenwald was excluded, since it can also grab creatures, and it didn't really feel like it deserved to be here. Alright, let's take a look at the 10 land tutors that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic the Gathering. This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Here's a quick reminder on how I rank cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships. At number 10, it's Reap and Sow. For 3 generic and a green, it's a sorcery that can either destroy a land or tutor up a land and put it onto the battlefield, and it has Entwine for 1 generic and a green, and if you pay that additional cost, you get both effects. So in addition to being able to grab any land with its second mode, Reap and Sow also puts that land into play untapped, which is pretty sweet. Destroying a land and ramping your own mana at the same time is a great feeling. Reap and Sow often saw play in Tooth and Nail decks. It was a good fit there, both because the deck was good at ramping and casting this for 6 in the early game, and also because it could help you search up your ramp lands of choice, whether it was Cloudpost or Tron lands. Reap and Sow has also been played in Pauper Tron decks, but it doesn't have any top 8 since 2020, and it's very far behind every other card on this list. In fact, I'm not sure I've ever seen a bigger gap in points between the number 10 and number 9 card, and that number 9 card is Sowing Mycospawn. For 3 generic and a green, it's a 4/4 with Devoid, and it has Kicker for 1 generic and a colorless. When you cast the Mycospawn, you search up a land and put it onto the battlefield, and if you kicked it, you also exile a land. Basically, it's capable of tutoring up any land and putting it onto the battlefield directly, and if you have the extra mana, you can simultaneously take away your opponent's best land, which is a pretty nasty combination. And it's also actually a callback to Reap and Sow, which we just talked about. As good as that card was, this one is way better, since you can spend the same amount of total mana and also get a body in addition to the ramp and potential land destruction. This is a Modern Horizons 3 card, which means that the only 60 card formats it's legal in are Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. It also means it only came out last year, which makes its score of 74 all the more impressive. It was instantly a great card because it fits so well with what Eldrazi decks were already doing in multiple formats. They tend to be reliant on powerful lands that let you cast even the biggest of Eldrazi quite quickly, like Ugin's Labyrinth, Eye of Ugin, and Eldrazi Temple, and the Mycospawn's ability to grab those makes it feel like you're getting a whole lot more than just one land. As we'll see with many cards on this list, decks that play land tutors also have the luxury of being able to run some toolbox lands to grab in the right situation, like Bojuka Bog against a graveyard deck, so the Mycospawn is an incredibly powerful, incredibly flexible card, so much so that it actually got banned in Legacy fairly quickly, but it's continuing to see heavy play in Modern and occasional play in Vintage. It's almost assuredly going to end up higher on this list in the future. At number 8, it's Scapeshift. Most of the cards on this list can only grab you a single land at a time, but not Scapeshift. It costs 2 generic and 2 green for a sorcery that lets you sacrifice any number of lands, then you search your library for up to that many lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. So yeah, it does take some setup in the form of other lands, but its ability to grab multiple lands of any kind all at once is pretty much unrivaled, especially for only 4 mana, and indeed its top 8s have all come in decks that look to cast Scapeshift quickly and generate absurd, usually game-winning value. The first decks to achieve this appeared in Extended, where you would ramp mana and then cast Scapeshift and grab as many mountains and Valakut the Molten Pinnacles as you could. Because of how the trigger works on Valakut, putting all those mountains and Valakuts into play at the same time means that every mountain will trigger every Valakut, provided you grabbed at least 5. That makes it easy to do lethal to the opponent. When the Modern format was created in 2011 to replace Extended, Valakut was actually initially banned because of concerns about this combo, but it got unbanned in 2012, and for a long time Scapeshift decks were at the top of the pile in Modern. More recently, Scapeshift has shown up in Amulet Titan decks, which don't do anything with Valakut, but they do run tons of powerful lands that would normally enter tapped, but thanks to the Amulet and the more recent addition of Spelunking, lands like Lotus Field can enter the battlefield untapped, letting you do all kinds of stuff with the mana they produce, and Scapeshift now grabbing lands that enter untapped opens up a whole new world of possibilities. After Scapeshift got reprinted in Core Set 2019, it also put up its first top 8s in Standard, this time alongside Field of the Dead, a land that generates 2/2 black zombie creature tokens anytime it or another land enters under your control, provided you control 7 or more lands with different names. As with Valakut, this means that when you give up all of your lands with Scapeshift and search up the field and a bunch of other lands with different names, you end up getting a 2/2 for each and every one of them. Field of the Dead ultimately got banned in Standard as well as in Pioneer and Modern, and that has limited how successful Scapeshift could be in those formats. However, it does still see play in Pioneer and Pioneer Landfall decks, which can use Scapeshift and Spelunking, alongside Nissa and Omnath to generate tons of value. Scapeshift is going to continue to put up top 8s going forward, and should be able to hang on to a spot on this list. At number 7, it's Elvish Reclaimer. For 1 green mana, it's a 1/2 that gets +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more lands in your graveyard, and it helps you put them there because it also has an activated ability that requires you to pay 2 generic, tap the Reclaimer and sacrifice a land, and it lets you tutor up any land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. So it can grab you lands, and before long it'll be a 3/4, which is relevant on most boards. It didn't see much play in Standard or Pioneer, but it has seen play in formats with larger card pools that have powerful land-based decks. For example, the Reclaimer has been played alongside Scapeshift in Modern Valakut and Amulet Titan decks, but it's been the most active by far in Legacy. That format features a lands deck that runs a whole lot of great utility lands that the Reclaimer can grab, like Caracas and the Tabernacle at the Pendrell Vale. And the deck's main win condition is also a land-based combo, Dark Depths and Thespian Stage. If you copy Dark Depths with the stage, it immediately gets sacrificed because it doesn't have counters, and you get a 20/20 Merit Lage token. So the Reclaimer helps assemble those game-ending combos, as well as being a useful way to grab powerful utility lands. While lands is far and away the deck that the Reclaimer has seen the most play in, it's also been used in decks that use Cloudpost or Gaia's Cradle to produce absurd amounts of mana, and obviously it helps you set that up. It's also been played in vintage land still decks, which are control decks that look to stick Stand Still, an enchantment that pops when any player casts a spell and draws their opponent 3 cards. The deck looks to use activated abilities and lands to do lots of stuff without even casting spells, which usually means that your opponent has to cast something, otherwise they're going to get killed by your lands. And the Reclaimer is one of the ways to make sure you keep doing stuff even without casting spells. Elvish Reclaimer is still active in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and it has a decent shot at moving higher on the list, although the cards in front of it are generally quite active too. At number 6, it's Golos Tireless Pilgrim. For 5 generic, it's a legendary artifact creature, and when it enters, it tutors up a land and puts it onto the battlefield tapped. You can also pay 2 generic and 1 mana of each color and exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you can play them without paying their mana costs. Golos is super powerful. We already know how good his Interest Trigger can be because of all the power and flexibility you have when you can grab any land, and Golos' activated ability is the kind of thing that can win you the game in a single activation, and of course, getting that kind of mana is even easier thanks to Golos' Interest Trigger. In Standard and Modern, he was played in the aforementioned Field of the Dead decks, but after the field got banned, Golos never really found another home in either format. However, it had a life in Modern beyond Field of the Dead getting banned, as it sees play in decks dependent on powerful non-basic lands, like the aforementioned Tron lands or Valakut. Similarly, it's played in Legacy Cloudpost decks. Vintage is where Golos has really carved out a home for itself, though. There it's been played in Workshop decks, which lean really hard on Mishra's Workshop, a powerful land that can tap for 3 mana if you're using it on artifacts. This means you can have Golos come down way early, especially with the Power 9 around, and he can tutor up more Workshops or Tolarian Academy to give you an even bigger mana boost. Academy is restricted in Vintage, so having such a great way to tutor up one of your best cards is really, really great. It's also worth noting that Golos is so strong, especially when you can consistently cast him multiple times, that he's banned in Commander. Golos is going to keep putting up points in Modern, Legacy, and especially Vintage. Speaking of Golos Tireless Pilgrim, I'm tirelessly working to get to 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and hit the subscribe button so you stay aware of all the magic content I make, and even if you think you're subscribed, you should double check, because more than half of my viewers aren't subscribed. At number 5, it's Sylvan Scrying. Certainly the most straightforward card on the list. It's a sorcery that costs 1 generic and a green, and lets you tutor up any land and put it into your hand. The cards we've seen so far all put the land you tutor up on the battlefield, and Sylvan Scrying doesn't. However, it doesn't require any setup of any kind and is pretty cheap, so it still ends up being a pretty good land tutor. It first saw play in Mirrodin Block Constructed, the very first format to feature Cloud Post decks. Over the years, it's also tutored up lots of Tron lands, Dark Depths, and more across multiple formats, although it sees far more play in formats with smaller card pools, because there are better land tutors in Legacy and Vintage. However, Sylvan Scrying is legal in Pioneer thanks to a Battle for Zendikar reprint, and it's taken advantage of that in a big way. Lotus Field decks have been at the top of the format for a long time, and as you can guess from the name, they're highly reliant on that particular land, which they intend to untap repeatedly to produce insane mana, and step 1 of achieving that is actually getting your Lotus Fields, and Sylvan Scrying is the best way to do it in Pioneer. It also sees play in Modern, largely in decks we've already discussed, but it's also used in Cabal Coffer decks, which look to get the Coffers and Urborg in play to produce insane amounts of mana and combo off, something that Sylvan Scrying is pretty great at helping you achieve. Sylvan Scrying is going to continue to put up top 8s in Pioneer and Modern going forward. At number 4, it's Knight of the Reliquary. For 1 generic, a green, and a white, it's a 2/2 that gets +1/+1 for each land in your graveyard, and you can tap it and sacrifice to forest or plains and tutor up a land and put it into play. It's another one of these that actually puts the land into play untapped. It's a lot like Elvish Reclaimer in a lot of ways. It's harder to cast and requires lands of specific types to use its ability, but it also gets buffed by each individual land, and its activated ability doesn't cost any mana. It was played in standard zoo decks, which prominently featured landfall, and it was a useful way to trigger your Lotus Cobras and the like, and these decks also ran lots of fetch lands, which were a good way to grow the Knight into a very scary threat. It was also featured in extended zoo decks as well as Life from the Loam decks, which could use that powerful sorcery to both recur lands that the Knight sacrificed and help you mill more lands with Dredge. It's also been successful in Modern, showing up in decks like Valakut, but it also used to be played in a combo deck in the format. The game plan was to get both Retreat to Coralhelm and the Knight in play at the same time. The Retreat has a landfall trigger that untaps a creature, and that means every time you grab a land with the Knight, you can untap it and do it again, all the way until it's absolutely massive and can kill the opponent with a single attack, or until you grab enough lands to just win the game. And in addition to being yet another card on the list that helps assemble the Dark Depths combo in Legacy and Vintage, it's also been played in Hate Bear decks in both formats. These are creature-based decks that run lots of effects that nerf opposing decks, and while the Knight doesn't exactly have one of those, having the ability to tutor up any land means you can grab utility lands that are good in specific situations, like Bojuka Bog or Maze of Ith. Knight of the Reliquary is going to continue to put up top 8s going forward. At number 3, it's Crop Rotation. It's the primary card I was talking about when I said that the Eternal formats have a better land tutor than Sylvan Scrying. For 1 green mana, it's an instant that requires you to sacrifice a land as an additional cost to cast it, and then it lets you tutor up a land and put it onto the battlefield untapped. Yeah, this is crazy efficient. Sure, giving up a land can be a little bit of a bummer, but it's a 1 mana instant that lets you tutor up any land you want, and it doesn't even enter tapped, so you can use it immediately, so that additional cost is well worth playing. It first found success in Urza's Block Constructed, where it was used to grab Gaia's Cradle in a mono green deck. However, it went inactive for a long time after that because it didn't see any play in Standard and Extended, and it got banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage during the sweeping bans of 1999 that were meant to put an end to combo deck dominance in multiple formats, and one of the ways they did this was getting rid of lots of really good tutors that were making decks too consistent. However, it got unbanned in Legacy in 2004 and unrestricted in Vintage in 2009, and it quickly found its way into decks in both formats. It's been used to search up all kinds of lands that we've already discussed, like Cloud Post, Dark Depths, Tolarian Academy, and a bunch of sweet utility lands that those decks can easily tutor up. But it's also been used in Vintage Bazaar of Baghdad decks. It's incredibly important for those decks to have a turn 1 Bazaar, so that they can draw and discard a whole bunch of cards, allowing them to throw a bunch of creatures on the board for no mana at all, like Hollow One and Root Wallas, and Crop Rotation basically gives you more copies of that all-important land, allowing those decks to go off more consistently. It's also been played in Pauper, a format where only commons are legal, where it's one of the best cards for helping assemble the Tron lands. Crop Rotation is going to continue to put up top 8s going forward. At number 2, it's Primeval Titan. For 4 generic and 2 green, it's a 6/6 trampler, and when it enters or attacks, you tutor up any 2 lands and put them onto the battlefield tapped. Yeah, this guy is an absolute powerhouse, as he gives you a big threatening body and generates a 3-for-1 immediately by grabbing you any 2 lands you might want, and he keeps doing it from there, allowing you to build a massive mana advantage. It saw plenty of play in Standard. That was a Standard format that featured Valakut after all, and while you couldn't quite combo off like with Scapeshift, the Titan was pretty adept at grabbing that powerful land and mountains to quickly overpower the opponent. Another commonly tutored up land in Standard was Kessig Wolfrun, a land that can put all that mana to good use by giving a creature a massive buff. It was also played alongside Scapeshift in extended Valakut decks. However, once the extended format was retired and the modern format was created, Primeval Titan really took off. And that format's Amulet Titan deck is certainly the most well-known Primeval Titan deck in the history of Magic. I've mentioned the deck a few times in this video, but was saving a deep dive on it for our discussion of the Titan. These decks look to quickly produce mana with Amulet of Vigor and bounce lands like Simic Growth Chamber. Typically, the bounce lands enter tapped and stay tapped, but if you have an Amulet in play, they untap, and you can tap them to produce 2 mana right away. That's already pretty sweet, but it gets even better than that because Amulet Titan decks use cards that give them multiple land drops in a turn, like Summer Bloom. Once you cast that, you can just play the same bounce land 4 times in a turn and get 2 mana every time you do it. So turn 1 Amulet into turn 2 Bloom usually means the Titan is hitting the battlefield immediately. Yeah, that's busted, and Summer Bloom got banned in Modern because of it, but Amulet Titan decks have continued on even without it since they can still very quickly get a Titan out, and once they do, the game is often over. The trick is to search up a combination of lands that either let you do lethal or build an insurmountable advantage. For example, if you search up Boros Garrison and Slayer's Stronghold, you can immediately give the Titan +2/+0 in haste, allowing you to attack and grab 2 more lands. Here, Sunhome Fortress of the Legion often enters the mix, as it can allow the Titan to do lethal super quickly. In addition to all of that, the deck runs tons of great utility lands, as do most decks running this type of effect. Amulet Titan decks have been a big factor in Modern pretty much since the format was created, and they continue to be. They've undergone changes over the year to be sure, but the core of the deck is still the Amulet and the Titan doing absurd stuff thanks to the Titan's ability to tutor up any lands and the Amulet's ability to allow them to untap. The Titan also sees a bit of play in Legacy Cloudpost decks. One other notable thing about the Titan, it's banned in Commander, as the ability to tutor up multiple powerful lands in that singleton format can be extra absurd. Primeval Titan is going to continue to put up top 8s, especially in Modern, and it will be interesting to see if it can ever catch the number 1 card on the list, which is Expedition Map. For 1 generic mana, it's an artifact, and you can pay 2 generic and tap it and sacrifice it to tutor up a land and put it into your hand. So this is another one that doesn't actually put the land on the battlefield, and it's not nearly as efficient as something like Sylvan Scrying, since you end up paying 3 mana overall. But there's one really important thing about the map. Any deck can use it because it's colorless, and because it's an artifact, many decks can generate additional synergy with it too. The map being colorless has been especially important for Tron decks in Modern and Pauper, as well as Cloudpost decks in Legacy. Those decks are all highly reliant on assembling lands that can only produce colorless mana, and not trying to run something that requires green mana means they can be much more consistent. This was such a problem in Pauper that the map was actually banned there between 2020 and 2022. However, the map also sees play in less colorless-oriented decks like Modern Amulet Titan and Legacy lands. Also, thanks to a reprint in Foundations, it's also legal in Standard right now, although so far it doesn't have any top 8s, and the map really needs some insane lands to be worth playing. And that could happen in the near future, but it's not really the case now. But that reprint did make it legal in Pioneer, which was good news for Lotus Field players. Expedition Map is still very active in Modern and Legacy, and is likely to put up more top 8s in Pioneer, and because it's used in a wider variety of decks than the Titan is, I think there's a good chance that it manages to continue to put up more top 8s than it does. So, those are Magic's best land tutors. If you're a non-basic land connoisseur, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past videos, including almost 900 MTG top 10s, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.